all the listeners of the ID5 podcast. Welcome to How to Thrive in the Cookieless Present. I'm Joanna Burton, the Chief Strategy Officer of ID5. For this ID5 podcast series, we're talking with a range of experts sharing their findings and case study results from real tests into the effectiveness of cookieless technologies. Digital advertising industry is really changing a lot with the deprecation of traditional signals that are used in digital advertising. There's changing privacy regulations, there's the influence of big tech, lots of change. But what we all know for certain is that advertisers and publishers are already missing out on reaching a really valuable audience using cookieless browsers like Safari and Firefox. Now, this is a trendy topic. There's a lot of talk about this topic, but with this podcast series, we're really getting into the real results, what's actually live and what's really happening now. We hope that that will be useful in helping you, our listeners, and some viewers really better understand what works and what doesn't, and inform your future strategy as you navigate the ever-changing identity landscape. Today, I'm joined by Zack Dugow from Insticator, which is a global publisher engagement platform. ID5 has been partnering with Insticator since early 2020. Welcome, Zack.
Thank you, Joanna. Great to be here.
It's really great to have you. Now, Zack, you are the founder and the CEO of Insticator. Could you give me a bit of an overview of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been in business now about 10 years. It's actually our 10th anniversary. Where have the last 10 years gone? So a quick overview, we're an engagement and monetization leader for publishers, and we do that by with our 4 core products. And so our products are our trivia and polling unit that we use to engage audiences, our commenting product that we embed on the site where we can drive conversations through comments where users can engage in community, and we use AI and human moderation to moderate those comments so that publishers don't need to be worried about hate speech or trolling, and they can really thrive on that engagement. And then we also have our own full ad management products where we manage all of the ad units for different publishers, and our own SSP as well. So we can use all this first-party data we collect to drive higher monetization. And so engagement and monetization and identity is a key part of our business, as with our trivia and polling product, as users engage, we pull in first-party data, we store that first-party data, and then we look to utilize that first-party data. We pass this back to a publisher, so this can live inside of their GAM instance or their data management platform, as well as we drive higher monetization vis-a-vis ad campaigns in our system that use the first-party data that we collect for all of the ad targeting inside of our platform. So that's a quick overview on Insticator.
And you work with some pretty impressive publishers, right?
Yeah, so we work with from Major League Baseball to Ancestry Group to mid-tail publishers like Lee Enterprises and other publishers like WebMD across the globe.
A global business.
Yes.
Excellent. And how did you come to found the business?
Gosh, that is such an interesting story. So we got started about 10 years ago doing something different than what we did now, not unlike lots of tech companies that launch and then they kind of pivot into what drives value. So the initial idea for Insticator was a social TV web application where people could predict outcomes of TV shows and sporting events that they could win points to redeem for rewards on an ad-supported environment. So the idea was really to drive engagement and ad dollars around tune-in and predictions on TV shows like fan communities. And we launched and we had success with that. And our 2 biggest communities were these 2 vampire shows. If you've got teenage daughters, it's a big hit in the tween community, The Vampire Diaries Online and The Originals. And after launching those 2 communities that did very well on our platform, we realized we needed to go to where the fans were for different shows. So we started working with sports sites and we changed our technology to be an embedded technology. And then we started embedding to sports sites, content sites. One site became 10, became 50, became 500, as we found we could really drive increases in time on site and page views per session, as well as monetization. And that's how we got started in our business.
Wow, that's such an interesting journey.
Yeah. And then we just continued to grow. And about 2.5 years ago, we saw a very big opportunity to kind of disrupt the commenting ecosystem. We had partnered with a company called Discuss for many years. And after they were acquired by Zeta Global, we saw an opportunity to really innovate even more so in the space. And so we acquired a company called Squawk. It was a small team, but solid product, revamped the code base and really launched Insticator commenting and have been scaling that, which really is an amazing complement to our trivia and polling product because it allows us to pull in email hash data. It allows us to use natural language processing to scan comments and bucket people into audiences. And as I'm sure, we'll talk even more so today, first party data is so key to monetization strategies for publishers. So it was a really great complement to what we were doing. And then about a year ago, just an hour south of London, we acquired a company right near Portsmouth called OKO Digital that was doing full ad management. So for a publisher, we can manage all of their ad units. We can give them engagement solutions. So we have a means for helping drive engagement on the site, collect first-party data, and monetize that first-party data.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you really do have lots of different opportunities to monetize and drive engagement. And as you said, you're having access to a lot of first-party data. So given that, what was your approach? You have access to first-party data, you have these publisher relationships. What has been your thinking and your approach to increasing addressability in cookieless environments?
So our idea is that if we can use email address as persistent identity, which we do and we collect, and we have well over 100 million emails now stored, that we can use that with cookies going away and store and attribute all of these other first-party data elements to that as identity, from like a trivia polling answer. So somebody will answer a sports question about Manchester United and they go into IB category, sports subcategory, football subcategory, Man U fan, and be able to have that stored against that end user so that we can be using all of this data as we learn about the person, what they comment, what kind of comments they read. 97% of people don't leave comments, but they read them. And so then using this data allows us to really drive a monetization edge for the publishers that we work with in any of our products. And that's, I think, one of the benefits of our platform is when you use one of our products, you kind of get the benefits of a lot of the data that we've collected also from our other products.
Okay, so you're able to continually be learning. And so what about specifically around cookieless? You have a lot of information. I can see how it could be deployed in third-party cookie environments, but how about specifically with regards to cookieless?
Yeah, so cookieless has been an interesting nut to crack, especially with, as we all know, Google's been changing the goalpost on this and the timing of this now twice. And I won't be surprised if they push it back again past 2024, to be completely honest. So we've been working and partnering with identity vendors like yourself. And I'll tell you, it's been a really interesting journey on the cookieless vendor process. But so for us, using email as that identity, just to come back to your initial question here, that's how we've been focusing on passing through these first-party data variables, whether it's Safari or it's Firefox, passing these first-party data variables to the different advertisers so that we can drive a higher bid. Because vis-a-vis just open market, we see and think the marketplace sees it's about a 40% or so CPM difference on a cookieless browser versus in Chrome in terms of the CPM and the bid. And so passing through that first party data, we're able to see a bit higher CPM than we would normally see without the data that we're passing through on those kind of more cookieless oriented browsers like Safari and Firefox and others.
We'll come back to that 40%, but you also mentioned that it's been an interesting journey working with identity vendors. Tell me about that. Tell me about the process, any learnings.
Yeah, so we found about a year or two ago, there was this explosion of identity vendors, right? I mean, there was hundreds. And I think for publishers, we try to help navigate this with as well, that our customers who we just talked to about these things, it was so difficult to understand who's providing value and who isn't. And so I think what we saw in the marketplace is publishers or platforms would layer in, ourselves include, a lot of different identity vendors, because the idea was, oh, we think they're providing value, or they might be providing value, and they really weren't the vast majority. And so then what happens is you end up eating up some speed and load time on page by having too many identity vendors in there. And so we narrowed down our identity vendors down to just 3 identity vendors now that we work with, up from initially testing around 10 or so to see, because we just did not see value from the vast majority of those identity vendors. I'll say one of the identity vendors that we did see value from and have kept is ID5, and we're so pleasantly surprised with that. But I think it's been a confusing time for platforms and publishers as it relates to identity vendors, because A/B testing was also really difficult. So most publishers are already resource constrained. And so we're fortunate at Insticator, we've got a lot of engineering resources and a fantastic team that has great systems set up for these types of tests. But most publishers, it's really difficult and time consuming to try to test and see which identity vendor is actually driving value, because it's really vague and it's a very gray area. So I think that being able to narrow down that list has been helpful, because you really want to just keep on page who's going to drive value for you as a platform or a publisher, and so that you're really being mindful of the speed of the page and the user experience and that balance.
It's absolutely critical to think about the user experience and the page load. And it's certainly, you want something that's better than third-party cookies, right? That's already causing enough problems. What if we could do something better? That was always our thought process. And when you talk about driving value, for us at ID5, to be able to improve the customer experience would be a value point. To be able to protect customer data would be a value point. But I think you mean driving value in terms of revenue lift, right?
Yes, that is what I mean. Sorry.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
No, but that's good. It's good to see the different perspectives. And I totally agree with you. How can we learn? How can we share? I think you've publishers spread all over the country, all over the globe. It's a difficult thing to understand. There's a lot of conversation around this trendy topic, as I said at the top of the podcast. But how can you do the analysis? What was your approach to doing the analysis?
So what we did is we ran multiple partners, and we have a good system of setup where we would run partners for different time periods, and we really run like an A/B test in terms of percentages of traffic over periods of time and analyze that data. And the reason why this is so difficult is because you really have to equalize all of the timing variables that can impact a test, right? Because let's say you run a test for 1 week and then you run it for that same following week. You can't really do that, because if that's at the end of the month, at the end of a quarter, that could be a 10% difference. And if really you had a 5% lift, it might show as a 15% lift. Or likewise, something might show 10% negative, but it's the beginning of a new month. And so our system is set up where we run tests against that same traffic in that same time, within the same days and time period, just sending to different users and then looking at that data based on those users is what's been very helpful for us. And, Joanne, I think your point is really valid. I think for most platforms and publishers, when they think of value, they think of like a lot of revenue lift. I think some front of mind will think about what you've described on the security front, but I think the vast majority, that's the main question they want to know is what's going to drive that revenue lift.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that varies by region, by approach, by different publishers. But for you, sure, you were looking at the revenue lift. And it sounds like you've done some really sophisticated results. So you gave us the headline earlier. You've seen a 40% increase in CPM. Can you tell us a bit more about the results that you found from these pretty sophisticated tests?
Yeah, so the results really varied. I mean, some partners, I'm not going to name any names, we just saw zero impact. And when you first see zero impact, I think for most platforms or companies like Insticators or others, you first want to dig in and diagnose, is it a technical issue? Because our business is so technical, it's not uncommon that, oh, this one variable is missing. And then without that one variable, the test isn't going to work successfully, or there's something wrong in the technology. So we did a lot of that? Are we, did we see what was the variable that was missing? Have we troubleshooted with the team there? And in the majority of cases, so we spent a lot of that time and the time and resources doing that, and just didn't see any significant change or difference with the tweaking. And then I think what happens is that, well, for us, we spent a lot of time talking with our other platforms and customers and sharing what we were seeing with our customers and others. And you find there's a trend. So you'll find just in really the conversations with other publishers and other platforms, which identity vendors were at the top for them. And it really helps you focus in on who is going to drive the most value, who is going to be the most engaging, and who's where you want to focus in on.
So with regard to that then, are you sharing learnings with the publishers that work with you? Are you sharing these learnings like with the wider industry? Has it been difficult over the past couple of years? Do you think that whilst there's so much talk about this topic, with many of us been shelter in place, lockdown in various places, there hasn't been that ability to have the word of mouth? How have you got around that?
Yeah, I would say we've spent a lot of time talking about it with our customers, but also with people outside that are not customers, that are like adjacent companies or people inside of the industry, and just describing the nature of what we're seeing and who are the partners. And I think that's where I think that's very useful for publishers to do, is that like that groupthink communication. Think of it like your own like think tank, if you will, because if you could speak to 7 or 8 publishers that have all tried different identity vendors or 7 or 8 platforms, and there's a couple names that all emerge for everybody, then you have a pretty good sense of where to focus in on.
Right. And so that's what you ultimately did. You looked at the lift, right? And then you decided to focus in.
Correct. That's exactly right. So we did a lot of our own initial testing ourselves. And we also mixed that with like communicating and helping the customers we work with, as well as some of the other platforms, to get a sense of what else could we be seeing that we weren't seeing yet, or what are some other places we should look. And then we found that to be very helpful.
So how did you apply the learnings?
I would say there was a couple of partners who we were spending a lot of time trying different things that we stopped trying different things because they hadn't seen results for a whole host of other platforms that we have spoken to as well. And it was like, well, maybe it's not just something that is wrong in the technical implementation. Maybe it's just, they're, for whatever reason, their product doesn't work well inside of our solution. Maybe it's that, maybe it's, timing, maybe it's something else. So that's sort of how we applied that.
And how are you going to make these solutions work for you going forward? What's the plan there?
So we've already whittled down the number of partners that we're working with in terms of on the identity front that we think really enrich our solution, our vision of continue to be the engagement leader for publishers and driving that engagement and monetization for them. So for us, that's deepening the relationships with the partners we know that are driving value for us, like ID5. And how can we do more there? I think we have a conversation going with your team as well on some other interesting strategies that we can implement vis-a-vis what we're doing on the email front. So I think that's a good place of focus for us. So we have a few conversations about what can we do more with the partners who we see are providing value. That's where we want to focus our time and resources.
Perfect. So we're always open to that. We have transparency as a company value, and we always want to learn from our clients and ensure that we can keep driving things forward. On the subject of which, obviously you have the ability to do these sophisticated tests that we've talked about. You really did the analysis, you equalized the environment to really be able to get results that you could compare. Why are you ahead? Are you ahead because you have access to the engineering, you're more dialed into what's going on? Why are you ahead, and how do you see the rest of the industry, the publishing industry?
Yeah, so I think that data is a key to our platform's success. So So it's front of mind for myself and our team in what we're already working on in driving value for publishers, separate from our identity vendor partnerships. So that's been a natural opportunity and segue for us. I think for a lot of publishers that are resource constrained or smaller teams, or where, say, they've got, data isn't a key part of their execution strategy right now. Say that they've got primarily open market spend on their site, they've got a small team, and data isn't something that, they know it's good and they hear that it's good, but it's not something that in their practical reality they're utilizing in any specific way. It's a lot more difficult to say, okay, I'm going to spend that time and those resources. I can do this, or I can add that other Amazon TAM partner. So I think for those companies, I think it's a lot more difficult to spend the time and the resources to say, okay, great, I'm going to really dig in and do a proper split test and multivariant test analysis here.
Yeah, so your focus on data and engineering has really paid off in this regard. So what's your advice to the rest of the industry? What's your advice to other publishers and other engagement platforms about their and the wider industry in general about their cookieless advertising strategy?
I think it's really threefold. I think you need to have a really intentional identity strategy. I think partnering with companies like Insticator or other companies of ways that you can collect email addresses identity, and we think commenting is a great natural way of doing that, but there's other ways as well. There's different ways to try to entice subscriptions and otherwise that you can start to pull in. Identity is, I think, a key first step there, so you can start to really recognize your audience. The second is that I would say really speak to your friends in the industry, people that you trust, so that you can say, okay, great, who are the identity vendors that I should really focus in on? And I think ID5 always is one of the first names that comes in the top of that list, first or second, because just to be realistic, I don't think publishers have the time to evaluate 10, 15, 20 different vendors, and new companies are coming out with even more, there's even more on the horizon in terms of identity vendors and partners there. My advice is speak before if you haven't already implemented identity partners, speak to other publishers and platforms of like, who are your top 3 or 4, and try to nail that first, because 80, 90% of the value you're going to gain is really going to come at this moment in time from those top 3 or 4 partners. I do think maybe in the future, as the technology develops even further, perhaps there's more, perhaps it's still into like a consolidated smaller group of where that value is. Do not just pile in all of the identity vendors. Then it'll, and then slow down your page, and it'll be really difficult for you to understand who's driving value and not, because then you'll just know you're getting value, but you won't know who's driving it. And then it'll be a much bigger lift in time to try to remove that later on and kind of parse through.
Okay, so that's really great advice. So we're saying, listen to what others are telling you, but do your own research, but do it in a way where you can really measure and look not just at lift, but cost versus lift. So the effort, the actual impact on the page, the impact on all the data you might be sharing versus the revenue lift that might be driven from each partner.
That's exactly right. I think that's exactly right.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great place to end. That's really useful information. Thank you so much, Zack, for joining us today. You've really done the work and shared it with us. So thank you very much for joining on the ID5 podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joanne. It's been great to be here.